I'm Nick, and this is my Bambulab P1S. It's a 3D printer, and 3D printing is something that I've always wanted to get into, but it seemed like the barrier to entry was just very, very high, and the learning curve was very, very steep. But recently, I've been speaking to some friends who have 3D printers, and they were like, dude, the Bambulab stuff is really easy to set up and really easy to use. So I went to the website and I bought a P1S because it seemed to me like the perfect middle ground for someone who may not really be into 3D printing, who wants to get into it, or if it turns out to be like a hobby that I'm not really gonna dive into, then I can sell it or move it on or whatnot. But 3D printing has absolutely taken over my life. So I want to share some of the things that I've been working on with this P1S. This is an incredible machine. I did not know 3D printing was this easy. This video is not sponsored by Bambulab. I paid full price for this. When I went to buy this, I went to the website, I clicked every single option because I didn't want to miss something that I may have needed. And this is what turned up, a P1S and an MS-A2 Pro. Let me share some projects with you because I've learned a lot in the last 3 weeks. Maybe I've learned a little bit too quickly. I knew nothing about 3D printing. I didn't know what filament was. I didn't know what any of the materials were. I didn't know anything about it. I knew that they existed and you could do stuff with them. I didn't know about 3D modeling. I honestly had zero idea about it. Last year, I was in Melbourne, I was hanging out with some friends, and a friend of mine, he's called Tag Mods, his name's Ethan. He's got a whole fleet of 3D printers and resin printers and all this stuff. And I just asked him a couple questions. I was like, how hard is it? Is it easy to get into? And he basically said, he's like, dude, Bambulab has this one printer called the A1 and the A1 Mini, and they're like 400 Aussie dollars. You could just buy one and start playing around with it. And that's what planted the seed for me. I was thinking, you know what, maybe I should do it. And I got right to the point where I was about to buy it on Amazon in my cart. And then I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm really gonna use this thing. I don't really have anywhere to put it. Like maybe I shouldn't buy a 3D printer. And then the whole idea of 3D printing just started to run through my head for months and months and months. And there was other little things that I was tinkering with, like my retro stuff, and I'd be cutting metal and drilling metal and making these brackets out of metal. And I was like, you know what, man, wouldn't it just be easier if I could just 3D print it and prototype that way? Here's the thing, for me personally, I have a lot of ideas of things I've always wanted to make, and I have no experience with 3D modeling. Measuring stuff is fine. Doing drawing and stuff on paper and measuring things like that has always been very easy for me. But the software has always been something that I've never really been interested in. And this is where maybe not the best thing in the world comes in. It's called Tinkercad, and it's a web-based CAD application, I suppose. And I know it's not Blender or Fusion or whatever everyone else is using, but I've found it to be quite powerful for every single thing that I've wanted to do with 3D printing. I mean it, guys. Like in the studio, there's random brackets that I would go to the hardware store for and like get other bits and kind of match them together and just make something. But now in Tinkercad, I can just design it, print it, test it, prototype it, whatever I need to do and get it done in like 5 minutes. I've become very, very quick at Tinkercad. It's an incredible web-based application. I suggest you guys just try it out, even if you're not into 3D printing and you just want to mess around with stuff. I'll put a link to it in the description. Like I said, this video is not sponsored. This is all stuff that I've paid for, that I've just been lost in the last 3 weeks. That's why I haven't been uploading that much, because I'm like, oh, I want to like try design this thing. And then I did design that thing. I want to show you guys something that I've been thinking a lot about, and it's about this thing below me, and that is rack mounted equipment. For me, you guys may not know this, but I love rack mount servers. I love compact, high density compute. That's my whole thing. So first of all, here is a project I've been working on that I think is really cool. It's a 2U server enclosure. It's a very short depth that I've had sitting here for 10 years. And as technology and time has gone on, it hasn't really suited my use case. So it's just been sitting in a cupboard, and I had a thought last week. I was like, you know what? We could turn this into something very, very cool. And that's what I did. Let's take a look. A couple of the features of this are outdated. The one saving grace is its short depth and it's M-ATX. So quite a lot of interesting hardware will fit in here, but as mentioned, it was a little bit outdated. It had 4 3.5-inch hot swap drives with a mini SAS connector on the back. And I thought to myself, how can I build my own custom server that will do exactly what I want it to do using the 3D printer now that I have the technology to make this any way that I like? So I went shopping around on eBay and I found this. This is an 8-drive 2.5-inch enclosure for 2U servers. This one's made by Intel. I picked this one up on eBay for about 15 bucks. I couldn't believe it considering everywhere else I've looked, these are about 400 to 1,000 Australian dollars. So 15 bucks, I got super duper lucky with that. I'm not sure that the seller knew what he was selling, but you know, I got lucky. Anyway, so what I did was I gutted the front of this enclosure, and this has mounting hardware of its own. Well, it's got threaded screw holes, so I drilled into the metal, measured it all up. I then hard mounted this entire enclosure into the front of the case, and then I thought to myself, okay, cool. Now that that's done, I need to print the rest of the front of the case. How did I want to go about that? So I thought that one of the most important things with a 2U densely packed server enclosure is airflow, front to back, intake, exhaust out the back. Now, with short depth cases, especially with M-ATX form factor, you're not going to have a lot of fans for exhaust, but you can force a lot of air through the case, and that's where these 3 80mm fans come in. So I made a mounting bracket. This is one of the brackets I made. So there's 2 versions. There's a version without cutouts. This is an earlier version. The newer one has bigger cutouts, looks kind of like a dong in the middle. Anyway, that's for the cables to pass through. And essentially, when the fans are mounted to 2 of these, both 2 different designs, they friction mount in here, which is the frame that's in the front of the case, and then it's got like holes. The version that's in the case has like a little 1mm step down to account for making it flush with the front of the case, and so the whole thing doesn't move. It's got like a natural barrier to hold it into place. But yeah, that's basically how that works. And I was like, okay, that's cool. 3 80mm fans will fit in a 2U size because 2U is about 83 to 85mm, and you know, 80mm is less than 83 or 85. So the first 3D printing problem occurred to me, which is something I didn't really think of, and that was, how big can I print? 256mm by 256mm by 256mm is the print volume for the P1S. And guess how big this is? This section here. This section is 256mm. So I printed at the maximum width of the print bed. However, I put it on the print bed diagonally and it gave me a little bit of extra room. So there's a little tip. If there's something that you really want to make fit, place it diagonally. You get the extra length, if you will. I mean, it's Pythagoras theorem, right? Cool. Anyway, hey, I want this to look like a cool server, so I went and designed this hex grid with like crosses behind it, kind of making it random, if you will, because that's kind of how my brain is. And then I made some screw mount holes at the top on the case to mount it, and then I used the existing holes that are on the bottom of the case to mount it into a 4-part frame, really. So the way it works is the mesh sits at any distance I want away from the front of the case, because I made little brackets that hold onto the mesh, and this is an early version of how the friction mounting works for the mesh grid at the front of the case. So this kind of clips onto the mesh and then pushes in and slides into place. It's kind of like mating 2 things. Yeah, you get the idea. So the friction holds that into place. Behind it, the fan elements that I made with kind of 2 brackets on the front and the back of the 80mm fan slide in, and it's very tight with the tolerance, and it just slides in and it stays in place. So there's no screws holding any of the fans in. It's all friction mounted, which is really cool. I can be rough with it. I can throw it around, and it's really, really cool. I like this design that I kind of blended a whole bunch of different stuff to make it to work. As well as that, the last challenge was a power button. Now I was going to reuse the power button that I had from the case, but it turned out that it was just going to be too much work. And why wouldn't I just find a power button that had a combined power light in it from another case that I had laying around? So I had a Velco Velcase 3 with an integrated power button and a power light, and I harvested it because I haven't been using that case. It's been sitting in storage for like 3 years, or maybe 2 years, whatever. And then I designed another block with a cutout for it, which allows me to screw the button into place, so I didn't need to use any other mounting gear. And then that block is mounted to the side of the case. So yeah, so it almost looks like one cohesive panel, but with this little section here for the power button, and that is like screwed into the case, so it's mounted very, very well. And there's one last part. Well, this is a work in progress, so I'll be covering all of this when the motherboard that goes in here arrives, which is really freaking cool on its own. The other thing with short depth cases is they typically have a power supply mounting system, which will allow you to remove the power supply from the case in a very easy and convenient way in case you need to swap out the power supply. This came with an ATX power supply bracket for full compatibility with basically any off-the-shelf power supply. However, I ran into a couple problems. First of all, I printed an SFX to ATX adapter bracket that I mocked up and moved the power supply either up or down for SFX, because for this, SFX is better for airflow. We'll come back to that in the next part of the video where I'm designing some airflow guides. They're just waiting for the other hardware to come. Anyway, we'll put that adapter bracket into this bracket and it will be all good. The problem was the factory bracket does restrict the airflow a little bit, so I thought, you know what, let's pull out the factory bracket, let's redesign the bracket for the back of the case completely so we can mount that SFX power supply directly to essentially the cutout that I made on the case with perfect airflow. So this is a bracket. It's an SFX bracket. I'll link it down below on printables. I remixed this one so it's compatible with this case in particular. So yeah, I don't think it's a standard offset pattern for it, but if it is, you know, then I'm happy to share it, whatever. Anyway, I decided to mount the bracket to the outside of the case, giving me just a couple more mil of clearance for the power supply, because basically what happens with power supplies in this case is if you look at this bar, it will sit in line with that. I wanted the power supply to sit further back because of the SAS cables. I know that there's plenty of room, but I want to give them as much room as possible so they don't have to bend coming out of the front of the case. So there's like all these little things that I've been learning about, like things I need to look out for and think about, considering like we do heaps of case reviews and I always tell case manufacturers what they should and shouldn't do. And now I've had to think on the other side of that, like this is why I should do things. It's actually taught me quite a lot about a lot of decisions they make. Yeah, we've designed cases and released cases and whatnot, but it's a bit different when you're sitting there and actually moving everything around in CAD. Right, anyway, well, Tinkercad, it's not really CAD, is it? You know, someone will tell me that I'm wrong. So there's a couple versions of that I went through just to kind of figure out what the right solution was. And this one, it kind of annoyed me because I thought this one was going to be perfect this morning, and it turns out that because I changed the way I wanted to mount it, the holes are kind of wrong, and then I mocked it up and printed it out and redid it and put the brass inserts in so you guys could see it for the video, right? I think the 2U server enclosure is looking really, really cool, and it's almost ready for production. I'm just waiting for a motherboard and some drives to turn up, and it's just gonna be really, really cool. I think it's gonna live in this rack and replace this QNAP SSD NAS that I've got for editing, and I'm gonna edit everything off of that new thing. What a cool thing. I just like designed a front panel and some fan mounts and basically changed a case into something that I've always wanted it to be just because of a 3D printer. Crazy, right? And that's the thing. I've been so engrossed in 3D printing. I've been talking to all of my friends about it too, and they think I'm absolutely nuts, except one of my friends, Nathan from Amps, Pedals and Pickups. He was like, oh, that's really cool. And he was like, he checked the prices and they are on sale. And he went and bought a P1S combo, exactly the same as this for him too. He does all of the cool guitar stuff on YouTube. I'll link to his channel down below if you guys want to check it out, if you're into music and guitars and pickups and pedals and amps. And I mean, it's like right there in the name. Check out Nathan's channel. I'll link to that down below. He's a really cool guy, and I've also gotten him into 3D printing because I couldn't shut up about it. As far as the P1S goes, as I mentioned, this seemed to me like the easiest way to get into 3D printing. For me personally, when it comes to stuff like this, I don't want to have to mess around and tinker with it too much. Although I know there's heaps of custom stuff you can do with the P1S and basically every 3D printer, I wanted it to be almost an appliance where I can design something, I can send it to the printer, and it does the thing. Now, there have been a few teething problems, and that's mainly to do with the quality of the filament that I've used, because not all the filament that I've been using is Bambulab filament. I found here at JCar in Australia that I can get this PLA for about 15 bucks a spool, and this is a great way to start prototyping stuff. 15 bucks for a 1 kilo spool of PLA in Australia is insanely cheap. Now, the problem with this is maybe if you're into 3D printing in Australia and you don't know it's that cheap, it's gonna sell out everywhere. But I've been able to go back a few times and buy it, and basically they call it prototyping PLA, and you can get it in white or black, but I've just been printing everything with it. I do have a whole bunch of Bambulab PLA. Like, I'm not gonna get into ABS or anything like that for now. It's purely just been PLA and a little bit of TPU. See this right here? Printed this out of TPU. How cool is that? A little mic clip. Makes the audio on the channel better. But yeah, like with this cheap endofilament that I've been using for prototyping stuff, I found it to fail more than any of the Bambulab PLA filament. What's funny about that is I haven't had any prints with the Bambulab filament fail at all, and I've gone through just as much Bambulab PLA as I have with this stuff, and yeah, this stuff is, I don't know, it's a little bit not as good. But the interesting thing is, in Bamboo Studio, when you're loading this into the AMS, I read a few things about using filaments like this, and you can select a generic PLA profile, and it just works with no issues. So the failed prints are mainly down to the print bed itself not having good adhesion, and I've had to use some glue to just glue it down with a new layer. I don't really care about how anything looks, because the main thing is a lot of what I'm doing with the printer is stuff that you don't see, or it is stuff that you do see that you don't really care about the final finish of it. And been through a lot of different prototypes for a lot of the different things that I've been designing. Like some of the prototypes I would have printed really thin, almost paper thin prototypes just to test out some fitment, which I think is a pretty interesting way of prototyping, something I never really thought of until a bit later. I also toyed with prototype ideas in multi-pieces. So like having it, let's say you wanted to have a blank version of something, you could put a blank version, or if you wanted to have a more kind of specialized version of something, you could do that. This is a bit of a teaser for what's coming up in a minute. Stuff like little inset power buttons for rack mount servers. These, which I'm calling compute element sled thingamajigs. But as you can see, like there's one reoccurring thing is there's lots of prototypes for one particular type of thing right here that I've been through many of to get right. Like there's a lot of this particular prototype here. Like there's heaps of them, like more than I can imagine, because sometimes you move one thing and something is not quite right, and then you figure out, oh, hang on, you come across another problem. Like let's say this is the white stuff is the earlier stuff. The black ones are a bit later in the prototyping stage. And you get to stuff like this where I've done the brass insets for some of the stuff to test fit it before mounting it. And then you've got like different heights for the screws and different thicknesses for brackets and everything. And you know, you just kind of go down this rabbit hole of what's gonna fit and what's not gonna fit with a bunch of this stuff. And this is something that I didn't really have when I was just cutting up metal and drilling metal, because everything was like, had to be perfect every single time. But even little brackets like this, I'm like, oh, I could slot this into that, and then, you know, have a power button mount and all these little bits and pieces here. Some of the first things that I worked on were these little adapters for some aluminium extrusions that I was going to be working on. And what turned out is I made the whole thing in 3D and I didn't use aluminium, and I thought that the 3D printing would be, you know, just for brackets and stuff, but it turns out I can print entire sections of computer cases out of 3D printing stuff. I didn't really understand how that would work, but now I get it. Even little things like this is a bracket that helps do this. This is really cool. So if you don't know, we can go back to OG Gear Seekers quite easily. Like we can open the wall up. I made magnet insets to hold parts of the wall together with magnets, and there's like little skateboard bearings where everything slides, and it's all really, really well put together now because of 3D printing. There are so many little things that you can't see in the studio now that are 3D printed. Even this, check this out, right? These things that hold our light bars to the wall are 3D printed, and there's a couple different versions of them. They basically go into the slats and hold these light bars into the wall, and this taller version means I can overlap them over the top of each other. Then I've got a lower version that goes underneath them. So there's all these cool little things that I've been messing around with, and 3D printing has kind of just like opened up this world of making stuff really, really fun again, especially for content creation in the studio. Hey, I need a bracket for like some random thing. I'll just print it. I need a new lav clip out of TPU. I'll just print it. So yeah, really kind of opened my mind up to being a lot more creative with a lot of the things that I want to do. I'm genuinely excited about tech, and it's not a PC, it's a freaking 3D printer. This thing is awesome. I can finally manifest things in my head, put them into a web-based computer designing piece of software, and then hit print. And then it's a real tangible thing I can hold in my hands. And here is the whole coolest thing about this video. When the Minisforum MS-01 came out, I thought to myself, why isn't there a 1U server conversion kit that I can just buy for this thing? And starting off on this 3D printing journey, I ran into one thing about the MS-01 in particular. This is a 1U, I don't really know what to call it. It's kind of like an enclosure for the Minisforum MS-01 and MS-A2. I went looking on printables and I found a bunch of people who had made 2U enclosures or 2U adapter plates to use MS-01s and MS-A2s. And I thought to myself, like, that's cool, but it seems like a bit of a waste of 2U for something that is essentially a little bit thicker than a 1U enclosure. So then I thought, if it's only a little bit bigger than 1U, why is it bigger than 1U? And it got me thinking, the reason that it's larger than 1U is the outer shell, right? Because the width of the back without the shell is a little bit wider than 1U, but when you're sliding it into a rack, believe it or not, it still fits. So what I decided to do was get rid of the outer shell and turn these into open air compute elements in a rack. This is not a problem. I think some people might find this a bit strange that there's no casing for this, but when it's in a rack, you're only going to see the front of the thing anyway, right? And then you've got really good airflow because I've designed it in a way that the air gets pulled in through the front anyway. So yeah, I mean, that's the theory. Haven't really tested it that far. But how this works is really cool. So earlier in the video, I showed a million different prototypes. I went through heaps of different stages with this, guys, like from first iterations where I'm like, oh, I wanted to test the rigidity of what it would be like to have a system to slide into this. I then was like, oh, we'll add some bracing to it to make it a little bit stronger. To versions of it that had individual front plates, so you could remove them and add blanking plates if you only had one system. And then I thought, you know what? If you're gonna be rack mounting this, chances are you might have 2 of them or 1 of each. So let's just make it for people who want to put 2 of them and not 1. And really, you could remix the front and just make it blank anyway. Or maybe I'll just do that anyway, just depending on which side you want it on. And that's the whole thing here. I really wanted to make a 1U server enclosure for these because they're just so cool and they're so densely packed with power that I'm surprised it hadn't been done before. Maybe it had and I couldn't find it, but this is my approach. Anyway, so first of all, on printables, I found someone who'd made a case for the MS-01 that included the cutout for the factory clip on the back. So basically the original case, but 3D printed. And then I thought, you know what, if I just pulled some of the measurements out for that, I could figure out the perfect place for the clip, because that's all I wanted to retain was the factory clip for when you slide it into the case, right? Still makes a satisfying click. So that was the first challenge, so figuring out all of those measurements. The next challenge was finding what the offset was to make it fit in a 1U from the front. So I had a bit of time figuring out what the right height was. I also had to account for things like the I/O cutout on the front, the power button cutout, in case I wanted to make a custom power button, which I did out of clear PLA. How cool is that? It lights up. And there were a lot of just different factors that came up as I was designing this, and I was chatting closely with my mate RobTech again, mini PC guy, and he was saying, oh, you know, like if you just make it 1U and it just has the elements on it, what's stopping people from snapping it? And I'm like, oh man, you know, people aren't stupid, they'll figure it out. And then he's like, well, what if someone just does it by mistake? And I'm like, you're right. So I made a support bracket. This was basically the last thing that I had to print all of this, and then I pre-printed holes in these element sections, and then I made that bracket in the middle. And now this thing is insanely solid, so shout out to Rob for giving me the idea of making this insanely solid. The coolest thing about all of this is the MS-01 and A2 slide in. They're very similar. There are some differences with them, but they slide in, they both clip into place just like they would for a factory version. The one challenge of all of this was a stupid one, and that was the power button. The front I/O was a little bit tricky to get perfect, but the power button, they're slightly different on both, and I wanted to make a version that would work on both, and they do. And I printed them out of clear PLA. So they illuminate like the factory power button, but cooler, because I did it, not Minisforum. Yeah. This is one of the coolest things I've ever done. And if you want to know if it goes into a server rack, showing you how it works. Just using some rack studs, just because they're not as bad on plastic, but already I'm not even holding it. This is so cool to see that this is something that I designed, and it's something you could really use. It's really freaking cool, guys. I'm so excited to do this. This is the first time that I'm mounting it all up with the power buttons installed and just everything. So freaking cool. Look at this. I can't believe this is a real thing that I designed for enthusiasts that want to mount 2 of these in a 1U enclosure. Can you imagine if you had like 8, you could do 4U and have 8 bits of compute in 4U. So freaking cool, man. I really, this is why I love this rack mount stuff. It just, you look at it, it doesn't look like anything, and it just does the job. Look at my main computers, guys, right here. Gaming PC, editing PC. I love it. I love rack mount stuff. So cool. I guess the hardest thing about 3D printing for me so far has been making this video, because I really don't know what to talk about. I don't know what you guys want to see with this kind of stuff. I have ideas of what I want to do. When we do case reviews and stuff like that, I want to spend time on creating custom pieces that you can add to your case if the case is missing a feature, how cool would that be? Hey, Nick just designed this cool thing to fix a problem with a case that's coming out. And if you've got a 3D printer, you can just print it yourself for free. So all of the things that I'm talking about that are kind of things you can buy that aren't custom to me, I will have on our printables profile, because I mean, isn't that where people put all their stuff? I don't know how it works yet, guys. I'm not an expert in this stuff. Like I said, I have no idea what I'm doing yet, except I kind of figured out how to design stuff and I know how the printer works. And my buddy Rob Tech, if you haven't subscribed to Rob Tech, he's got a mini PC channel. I was talking to him last night and I said to him, dude, I really want to make a video about 3D printing and all the stuff I've been doing. And I know I've been chewing your ear off about this 3D printer stuff since before I bought it. How do I make a video like this? And he basically said to me, he's just like, dude, just make a video talking about exactly what you've talked to me about, because then people might find it interesting. Because he finds it interesting, he just doesn't have a 3D printer, I suppose. Maybe he can be like Nathan and get himself one eventually too. But he said to me, like, he was impressed at how quickly I learn everything, which is an interesting thing, because I feel like for me, when it comes to something I'm really into, I'll just go all in and just figure out how it works. And that's kind of like, I think this is maybe just a tech guy tinkering thing, right? Like if you're really into tech and you want to know how something works, you'll figure it out. And that's kind of what this whole channel is about at the end of the day, right? Yeah, I'm an expert before YouTube in data center and enterprise and the super nerdy stuff. And yeah, to be honest, I dumb the content down quite a bit because I don't want people to be put off by me kind of being too nerdy, if that makes sense. But this stuff and learning this stuff to me has been one of the most enjoyable things that has happened to me in years when it comes to just like tinkering. It's amazing. How did I not get into 3D printing sooner? I don't know what is wrong with me. I guess because I thought that it would smell bad. I also thought it would take up too much space. I thought that it would heat up rooms or I need a dedicated space. But with printers like the P1S, I've got the activated carbon filters and stuff in here. This has no smell whatsoever. It's really not even that loud. I run this thing almost all of the waking hours of the day, and it's become white noise to me. It's really not as insanely loud as I thought it was going to be. And that's what impresses me about the P1S in general. I've heard that people hate 3D printers in their houses because they're too loud and they're obnoxious and all of these other things, or you need a house, you need to put it in the garage. But I know I'm probably not saying the right thing, but having this in my office has been absolutely fine. To be honest, I have 2 offices anyway, so half the time when this is running, I'm not even in here. It's printing while I'm working in the office in the studio, and my main office, yeah, this just runs. I have the window open all day, and yeah, it doesn't smell. I can't believe it. I thought that it would have some kind of smell, but it doesn't smell like anything. And chances are, I have no idea what I'm talking about, and I'm absolutely wrong about all of this stuff, but this is something that I'm willing to be wrong about, because there's millions of 3D printing experts out there. And even though I know how to design stuff and print stuff, there's heaps of stuff I just don't know still. So if you've got any recommendations and some modifications I should be making to the P1S to make the printing workflow a bit better, please let me know, because there's just too much information out there for me to go looking at. But if there's any experts out there who just know the answer, please let me know. I'm happy to spend more money on this thing. In fact, I've toyed with the idea of buying a second one, and Claire's probably not happy about that. We've discussed this, but I really kind of want to have a second one so I can work on multiple things at the same time. But we live in an apartment, so I don't want to go too nuts. However, the H2D, the one that does all the laser cutting and all the crazy stuff, that would be freaking cool. Just have like this whole thing here that I could just build anything that I wanted with. But yeah, let me know if you guys are into 3D printing, and let me know if I'm an idiot if it's taken me too long to even think about getting into it. I just can't believe it's this accessible now. Honestly, guys, it's freaking cool. I love this thing. All right, I want to stop yapping. Yeah. This has been, like I said, I'm just I'm so excited about this stuff, and I don't know how to make a video about it except just mentally dumping everything that I've kind of learnt and been playing around with. A lot of the techniques and stuff that I do with the 3D printing is stuff that I knew before, like the brass insets in plastic and stuff. That's all stuff I've done before. Soldering, all this stuff is stuff that I've been doing for years. It's just really down to the designing and printing and having a machine that can do it. And for me, as someone who knew absolutely nothing about 3D printing 3 weeks ago, if I had to recommend a 3D printer for someone who wants to get into it, and you've got a little bit of money to spend on it, it's the P1S every single time. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but learning and setup and everything is just so freaking easy. And I honestly can't believe that I didn't get into 3D printing sooner.